What is Decade and what is the Decade app? I get these questions all the time, and I figured it was finally time to make a video that explains a little bit about what the Decade app teaches and how the stats portal works. Let's take a look first at some of the accolades that Decade has gotten in the first few years of existence. For starters, I'm a former playing professional who's won approximately 10 times around the world on various mini tours. I've also got several math-related degrees, and I've studied the game of poker in great detail and basically try to apply the expectation management that poker brings to the game of golf. In 2014, I got my amateur status back and decided that I could create a math-based system in order to optimize target selection and strategy. Unfortunately, when it came time for me to implement it that summer with my own game, I had a nagging elbow injury that forced me to caddy instead for a junior golfer from my home club. Our first event together was the Texas Amateur, which he won by 3, which was his first time to win more than a high school golf tournament. Next up, I caddied for him when he won the U.S. Junior Amateur Championships that summer. He also won the Transmiss Championship and won a college event that fall in his freshman year and was ranked number 3 in the world at that point, ascending all the way from number 3,300 when we first started working together. At this point, I was well aware that I was onto something good. Because SMU is located in Dallas, they were one of the first college teams that I worked with simply out of proximity. They hosted me for a Decade course management seminar in February of 2015, and within 6 months, Bryson DeChambeau was the reigning NCAA and U.S. Amateur champion. Rather than carry on about myself, let's see what Joe Buck had to say during the U.S. Amateur telecast.
DeChambeau, who attends SMU, went to a seminar conducted by Scott Fawcett at SMU about a year ago. Fawcett, a former pro who uses shot statistics to not only address a player's weaknesses, but also improve the percentages of shots a player takes. Bryson said he's helped me understand the percentages of going for flags, when to go for flags, and when not to. More of a shotgun approach rather than a sniper approach.
I could go on for a while, but I think you get the picture at this point. Decade has had quite a few successes. We've had 5 USGA champions and 5 different players ascend to number 1 in the world using this system. Let's move on now and take a brief look at what Decade is. We're going to give you just a very upper level view of what Decade teaches. Golf is probably one of the least effectively taught games in the world. This is in large part because of how long it takes to play a round of golf. More importantly, the traditional playing lesson, the way that it's given, you just don't see very many unique situations in a 9 or 18 hole playing lesson. Instead, approaching this problem the way that I originally did, with an indoor 4 or 5 hour seminar, is a much more efficient and emotionless environment in order to teach proper strategy. Through the use of a drone and Google Earth, I can give you every situation that is possible in golf in a few hours indoors, again removing the emotion of actually having to hit golf shots and really expedite the learning process. Additionally, I've caddied almost 1,500 holes over the last couple of years in PGA Tour events, PGA Tour qualifying schools, and top amateur events for players while they are winning, and I use my experiences from those events in order to help translate the mental part of strategy and discipline. Decade in Action is a simple process that does all the work for you. Millions of shots were analyzed to determine the optimal target for any shot. The result is an easy addition to your routine that actually takes less time than the typical process of selecting a target, if one is even selected. One of the main reasons golfers tend to peak later than athletes in other sports is due to the fact it takes a long time to learn proper strategy. Not any longer. Don't take a decade to learn proper strategy. Learn the Decade system in less than a day. What you've been looking at are screenshots from the actual videos that are contained within the Decade app. All I did was simply turn my 4 or 5 hour seminar into a couple hours of video tutorials that are all located within the library in the app. When you first download the app from your carrier's app store, this is what you'll see. You then create your account and get your login information at birdiefire.com. Once you've done that, you're ready to go. Initially, when you click on the Video tab, you will see the tutorial video series. Just watch them one by one, right in order. They're usually 10 minutes, 11 minutes, 11 minutes. I tried to break them up to where they're not too exhaustive, but there is quite a bit of material to go through, so just watch them in order and start tracking your statistics using our phone interface. Now, what we're trying to do with this thing is keep the data entry component to under 10 minutes. Originally, we had a plan where you're going to take a picture of a pin sheet. That wound up being a total disaster. So now we've created what we consider to be the easiest interface in the market. For speed of entry, a few concessions have to be made, so there are a few things that we can't quite track perfectly. but it is imperative, in my opinion, that we keep this data entry component as short as possible. That way you'll actually put forth the effort to do it consistently and correctly. And there's a video within the app that gives you suggestions on how to track your statistics during your round in order to make this as efficient as possible post-round, as well as how to address certain situations you'll come into with explaining how a hole progressed. Once you've entered at least one round, you'll be able to start getting feedback from our statistics portal. As you can see, this is Martin Flores, one of my PGA Tour players' stats panel. We're working on quite a few more filters currently for the program, but as you can see, we've already got last round, last 3, last 10, 20, and season. So this way you can start seeing the trend detail. We can also break it down between your fall and spring events, practice rounds, tournament rounds, qualifying, or all. The default is tournament, and then you can also look, if you just want to look in isolation, at different areas of your game. But this next feature is what's going to separate Decade and Birdie Fire from everybody else. So here we are in the Trend Detail tab, but when we click on this Comparative Analysis tab, it's going to take you to another page. And what we've done is we've broken up every single score that's been entered in the database so far. Again, we've got 17 of the top 25 men's programs and 9 of the top 25 women's program using this portal. And we've taken each round that is 68 or below and we've made it a bucket, 69 to 71, 72 to 4, 75 to 7, and so on. We've created some more buckets up here in the 80s as we've started selling this to the general public now. And what you're going to see is Martin's scoring average right now is 69.96, which places him in this bucket right here. And so when you see these little circles with a dot, that means that you're performing in line with your peer group. If you see a green check to the side, that means that you're actually performing better than your peer group. So Martin's doing very well right now on par 3s and 4s. He's performing in line with his peer group on par 5s. You come down here, then we see a red X. That means that he is slightly below his peer group's average in birdies, but his fantastic bogey avoidance makes up for that. Now, this is our master key, and you can see I've got it separated for men and women, and you can see we've got all these scoring buckets and what the average scores are within those buckets. I'm obviously not going to show you my key because, hey, this is what we're working for, but I want to show you all the statistics that we're able to track from that minimal amount of data entry that I'm asking of you in the interface. So we've obviously got our metrics that are based purely on scoring, and as we go down here, you can see we also track bogeys per round, double bogeys per round, the birdie to bogey rate, and now here we start getting into the approach statistics. We're tracking greens in regulation from a number of different buckets. We're also tracking how many times you're on the fat side or short side of the green in regulation, or even on the green, how many times you're in a fairway bunker, left rough green in regulation, right rough green in regulation, total proximities, scoring average from all these different scoring buckets. Discipline, how many times you're making double bogeys without a penalty stroke. That's a huge thing that I teach in the app. Short game, what's your save rate from a few different conditions. This is one thing my original partner and I disagreed on. He wanted to track about 10 different categories right here, and I just didn't think we'd ever get a relevant sample size by having too many categories. I want to know how'd you do from the rough, the sand, the fairway, and how many flop shots are you having. Basically, I want more data in fewer buckets in order to turn around actionable advice to you as quickly as possible. Hopefully you're getting better every 6 months as you are progressing to the tour, and so old data doesn't really matter, and more importantly, when you're getting involved in a semester's golf tournament, I need to be able to provide you with information quickly in order to give you something to work on. If I had more categories, it would probably take me 3 times as long just to be able to figure out where your actual holes are. Again, certain concessions have to be made when trying to decide which statistics we can track and which ones actually lead to lower scores. Moving forward, we have a few proximity to the hole from sand, flop shot, rough, and strokes gained putting on saves. That's a really interesting category that I don't think anyone tracks in the world. Something I came up with when certain save rates weren't making very much sense to me. Off the tee, how often are you hitting driver? From this I can tell, are you being too conservative, or is there potentially a confidence situation going on that we need to address? I've had an indirect relationship working with one of the top female players in the world in 2017, and we can't get her to hit driver anywhere. She's already had several top 5s and yet is leaving the driver literally in the bag. That's because she thinks that she's so good that she can get away with not hitting it, but I can assure you if she would bring that thing out, she would have won a couple times already this season at a minimum. That's the kind of thing that I'm looking for from stats. I don't really care how many fairways you do or don't hit. I mean, while that tells us something, it doesn't tell us much. But what I think the art of statistics is not just the ability to do math. Math is relatively simple. The art of statistics is knowing if I can get a number to change, it will lead to the outcome that I'm searching for. And in golf, the outcome we are searching for is lower scores, period. Will hitting more fairways lead to lower scores? I don't know, it might, but it also might make you shoot higher if it also coincides with more tee shots in the trees and more holes with penalties due to not understanding proper strategy with regards as to how to center your shot pattern away from those hazards that you'll learn within the Decade app. That's a really important point to understand. You have to understand what does and doesn't lead to lower scores. One of our competitors tracks proximity and says that if you hit it closer to the hole, your scores will go down. That is categorically not true. You have to be able to look at a combination of several statistical categories. In that situation, it's proximity, greens and regulation, and what I call the Decade ratio, which is how often you are on the fat side or short side of the hole, in order to understand if your scores will go down or not. But you cannot just simply say hitting it closer will make your scores go down a half a stroke. That's not the way it works. Moving on. Rather than viewing our putting relative to score, we've actually taken the putting and broken it down by 20th percentiles of strokes gained putting rounds. What I mean by that is 20% of the time our players are having a 1.1 strokes gain or more putting round, and 20% of the time they're losing more than 3 1/4 strokes putting, the average being negative 1.02 strokes against the PGA Tour benchmark. Once we have our data broken down into these different buckets, we can start looking at our make rates from various buckets. We can start looking at these leave short rates, which has really yielded some pretty interesting information, our 3-putt avoidance, and again, back to the idea that you have to look at combinations of statistics. I don't really care what your 3-putt rate is in isolation. I want to know what your 3-putt rate is in conjunction with your leave short rate and how that relates to your make rate. And from that, we've written programs that can start to tell you either need to leave more short, fewer short, work on your line, work on your speed control, any number of things. And just to kind of finish the stats portal out, the last things we've got birdie putt make rates, par putt rate make rates, bogey putt make rates. These things start to look for some psychology within you. And then we've got how many strokes it takes you to hole out from various buckets. This will help you find out where your inflection point shifts to 2 putting on average in order to help deal with expectation management. Okay, back to the app now. I understand this is a fairly long video, but keep in mind I'm designing this to be somewhat of an infomercial for what Decade and our stats portal is like from A to Z. You understand the background and the genesis of Decade. You understand exactly how our stats portal and data entry interface are going to work, but this is honestly the coolest part about Decade. When I designed it, I wanted it to be able to suit 3 people. A type A person who wants to see every single stat physically possible, a guy who really wants to see where the holes in his game are, and another player who just really doesn't want to do anything except for get a little bit of content delivered to them that will help keep their game sharp. Here's how I accomplish that. When you click on this channel button in the app, you'll get a drop-down box that has the tutorial videos, For You, putting, driving, or all. The tutorial videos are obviously just the introductory videos as to how Decade works. This For You section, though, is derived from your stats. Let me show you how that works. Here we are back at Martin Flores' player page. And if you're the kind of guy who really wants to see every single stat that we have, well, here they all are. Knock yourself out. Have fun. If you're the kind of guy who simply wants to see where am I struggling, well, you can just go through and look for red X's, and when you see a cluster of red X's, you'll know that's your problem. Well, so here's Martin's short game. He's got quite a few red X's here where he's basically performing like a 73 shooter. So that guy who wants to see just where his hole in his game is can figure it out pretty simply. Look for a cluster of red X's. Or let's pretend that you're a guy who simply wants to sit back and not do anything. Well, for that player, all you need to do is scroll back up to the top, you go to your videos tab, you go to For You, and here it'll have some video suggestions for you that are based off of your statistical profile. Technically, you can be really lazy, not even open the app ever, and we'll email them to you once a week. One thing that I saw last year when I was first working with a few college teams was they all got off and won tournaments immediately, and then several of them kind of floundered away. And I believed that was because it would become out of sight, out of mind, and so that's the whole reason I decided to create this app, was to just barely keep stats and strategy in front of the players throughout the course of a season, so that way they wouldn't have any moment where they lose sight of the actual goal, shooting lower scores and winning golf tournaments. My teams that have been on the app since the start of the fall have all played far more consistent golf than several of the teams that I worked with in prior years did. And I do believe that's because of keeping this portal up and running and keeping the content fresh in their mind on a weekly basis. I'd love for you to sign up for Decade and see what it can do for you. The results have been astounding so far, and good luck to you.